Mapping out an independent Scotland, what it means for business, investors, and currency. We talked to the Globe's Eric Reguly. Also, one Canadian writer reflects on Scottish independence. I'm Affan Chowdhry. Welcome to Globe Now. Scotland is wrestling with independence, and on September 18th, voters will decide in a referendum. A yes vote would see Scotland leave the United Kingdom. Polling released today suggests that the decision is balanced on a knife edge between the Unionists and the Separatists. So let's map what a yes vote would mean for business, for the markets, and for currency. And no better person to help than the Globe's Europe Bureau Chief, Eric Reguly, who's here. Thank you so much, Eric.
Pleasure to be here.
What has Scotland got going for it in terms of business and industry?
It's got two big things. It's got the North Sea oil and it's got banks. It's got Royal Bank of Scotland, which at one point before the financial crisis was the biggest bank in the world.
So how is the North Sea oil industry going to be affected in the event of a yes vote?
Well, that's a good question. First of all, the North Sea is in decline. The oil companies are keen to slow that decline by investing more. Their big fear is, and they will not say this publicly, their big fear is that Scotland as an independent country will struggle financially in its first few years, will slap new taxes on the North Sea production, new income taxes. And if that happens, there's going to be less money to invest in keeping the production up. So they are actually very, very scared that an independent Scotland will whack them financially.
What happens to the banking industry?
Well, the banking industry's already voted. They're saying we're out of here.
Yeah.
And Royal Bank of Scotland has said that it would move to somewhere in England, presumably in London. The other banks would do the same. Now, why would they do that? Because A, they don't know what currency an independent Scotland would use. And until they know that, they don't know if there's going to be a central bank to backstop these banks. And remember, Royal Bank of Scotland, RBS, was bailed out during the financial crisis. So if there's another financial crisis, who would bail them out? What if there is no Bank of England? What if there's no central bank of Scotland? So these are huge unknowns. And it's really a matter of life and death for these banks if there's another crisis.
Okay, a lot of Canadian investors are going to be watching this closely. Right? And they're going to be wondering, what would be the immediate impact of a yes vote on the markets? What's the answer to that?
Well, it's already happening. The pound has lost, what, 5–6% in the last few weeks. If there's a yes vote, and it's going to be a photo finish, it's too close to call, the pound will probably lose a few more points. Economists say 5–6% down from here. So that would be the big one. Now, the smart money's been shorting the pound in the last few weeks in anticipation of this turmoil. The bigger question is what would happen after the vote. Yeah. I mean, Scotland doesn't still exist as part of the UK for another year and a half. So you could have turmoil for another year, volatility and turmoil in the pound for a year and a half until they figure out what share of the national debt goes where. Is there going to be a currency? Is there going to be a central bank in Scotland? All these affect the currency markets.
I mean, in that scenario, I imagine there are a lot of companies, maybe even Canadian companies, that have exposure in Scotland. What do they do?
Well, the big exposure for the Canadian companies is in oil. Talisman has got a pretty big operation up there. They're out of Calgary. Some service companies in the oil sector. I mean, they're worried about the taxation. I mean, they're not too worried about the effect on the UK sovereign bonds or the pound. They're mostly worried about the taxation level that Scotland may or may not impose on the oil sector after the referendum.
Now, in separatism, there is almost this implied looking inward in a world that is increasingly interconnected. How could the Scotland independence experiment go really wrong?
Well, the Scottish are very international. They're very outward looking, more so than the English. Now, the question is, will an independent Scotland be part of the European Union? Not automatically, no. They'd have to leave and reapply. Now, there are some countries who wouldn't want them back in. Which country? That would be Spain. Why Spain? Because Spain has its own independence movement in Catalonia. So it would be loath to recognize A, Scotland's independent, B, it wouldn't want them into the EU easily, because if they did that, then they just open the door for Catalonia to do the same thing. So it's a big unknown whether Scotland will be part of the EU. I think it desperately wants to stay in the EU, though, because they are traitors by nature.
Interesting. Thank you so much, Eric.
Thank you.
Well, we want to hear from you. Looking at your investment portfolio, what are you doing differently or planning in the event of a yes vote? Now, staying with the Scotland referendum, here's a pretty impressive number. Canada is home to 4.7 million people of Scottish descent. Author Ken McGoogan is one of them, and he is gripped. Not only is he of Scottish descent, he's also got the Quebec connection, having lived there. Here he reflects on the countdown to referendum day.
The referendum resonates with me as a Canadian with Scottish roots. Here you see my maple leaf tartan. I feel what they're feeling in Scotland in particular, but not just in Scotland, also in England. To me, I see this actually arising out of the Margaret Thatcher years. I mean, that cutting and slashing that she did alienated, I believe, a great many people both in England and in Scotland. But above all in Scotland, they never went along with all, the eradication of social programs and so forth. It's very intense and divisive. And we saw this with the Quebec referenda. I mean, families being torn apart. I feel the intensity on both sides. People are committed. There's a tremendous amount at stake here. People should be looking at what has evolved here in Canada, because to me that is a way of accommodating differences. We have done it. It's the Canadian system of federalism might be worth looking at, no matter how this comes out, and it's very too close to call. Yeah, I think it points up the genius of Canadian federalism.
Well, that's all for today's show. If you've got a moment, hop onto Twitter. What implications do you think the Scotland referendum will have for the sovereignty movement here in Quebec? Tweet us at Globe Now. I'm Affan Chowdhry. Thanks for watching.